editor of Building Enclosure. Thanks for listening along with us today. Building Enclosure launched an award this year called our Leadership Award. Anyone could submit individuals who they feel are doing an exceptional job helping to advance the AEC industry, committed to industry standards, and goals. Today, we're excited to announce our first ever winner, Dyer Brown's Director of Sustainability in Boston, Laurel Christensen. Laurel is also a leader with Mindful Materials, a nonprofit for which she focuses on fostering partnerships to promote sustainable product choices across the AEC. If you're an avid listener of our podcast, you'll know she recently co-authored the Reuse Roadmap with the goal of providing guidance to various stakeholders. Laurel is here today to chat with us about this award and her time in the industry. Laurel, congrats and thanks for sitting with us.
Thanks for having me.
So to start off, tell us about yourself. How did you get into the industry?
So my dad was an architect and my mom was a woodworker, actually. So I grew up in a house that my dad designed and built, and all the cabinets and a lot of the furniture my mom had designed and built. So I think that made it kind of obvious that I would go into design of some sort. I actually studied interior design. I was very into HGTV in high school and I loved like rearranging my room. So I applied to interior design program at the University of Kentucky. And I remember the first week of school, one of our professors said, if you think interior design is anything like HGTV, you are sorely mistaken. And I was crushed. Kidding, but I did actually end up, I loved interior design, but I ended up moving into architecture in my junior year and ended up ultimately getting my undergrad and master's in architecture from University of Kentucky. And then after graduating, I think we talked about this when I was on your podcast before, actually kind of pivoted and went to the manufacturer side. So I worked as an architect and engineering rep for Big Ass Fans. So that was kind of cool to see, to like be on the manufacturer side, to see the process of getting a product like specified into a job to actually getting it installed into a job, which is definitely not always the case. So that kind of gave me a nice, like, well-rounded experience of the industry. And then after a few years of that, I did go back to the architecture side and ultimately got my license a handful of years ago. And now I'm still kind of outside of the traditional role, but that's my short background.
Yeah, well, like I said, I know I've gotten the pleasure of being able to speak with you before, so I know about some things that you've done in the industry, but tell us, what are some of your favorite accomplishments professionally?
I would say definitely my role at Dyer Brown and the sustainable design leader role here would be probably top of the list. So when I first started at Dyer Brown, the firm had done a handful of lead projects. A lot of our sustainability approach was really based on client requests. If a client had specific needs or goals for their project, then we would focus on it. But sustainability wasn't like a core value for the firm. And so I really brought that to our leadership and said, this is something I'm super passionate about. And I remember vividly in my review, one of our principals said, we love that you care about this and we want to support you in it as long as it makes sense for you and the firm. And so during COVID, we were just a few years past our 50th anniversary as a firm. And obviously, as I think many firms were doing and many organizations during COVID, kind of doing a little bit of visioning and questioning, like, okay, what are we doing as an organization? How are we approaching the market in this kind of tumultuous time? And we went through a lot of visioning and discussions that everyone was involved in about, what is our core values as a firm. And it really emerged from that it wasn't just me that cared about sustainability. And so sustainability is now like very clearly stated as one of the three core values of Dyer Brown. And I was able to ultimately create a role of sustainable design leader here that wasn't even a role before. So I would say being able to kind of like pave that way and create that path for myself and ultimately like influence the firm as a whole is definitely my most favorite accomplishment.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, like you said, being a leader was such a big part of our leadership award, which was when we read all about you and learned more about you. I mean, it was like clear like who we wanted to be our first ever award winner. So with that being said, what does being a leader in the industry mean for you? Who are some of the leaders who inspired your career so far?
I so appreciate that. I think that being a leader really means being willing to kind of push back on like business as usual or the status quo. And I won't say not being afraid, because definitely I think everyone still has that fear. It's healthy to have some fear, but not accepting that you might fail trying something new, or pushing back against the norm. I sometimes joke that my life's motto is it never hurts to ask. You would be surprised the things that I've gotten in life by just asking. And I encourage everyone to ask the questions that maybe are holding back. And in terms of leaders that have inspired me, I could give a whole laundry list. I would say all women in architecture, particularly after becoming a mom in the last few years, all mothers in architecture are massive inspiration to me, because juggling architecture, which is a very pressing career, with parenting is super tough. So kudos to all the female and mother architects out there. But I would also love to just give a huge shout out to Building Green and their peer networks. So if you are someone who's an architect or a designer and you're in a sustainability focused role in your firm, the Building Green peer networks were a huge resource to me and continue to be. So this is a group of folks who either their title is sustainable design leader or director of sustainability, or that is a big part of what they do in their role, even if it's not their title. And so when I was exploring the possibility of kind of bringing a role like this to Dyer Brown, I did a ton of like informational interviews with other folks who were in this kind of role at their firms. And there's just, I would say, this kind of like pre-competitive, there are many firms that do similar work as us, or maybe competitors to Dyer Brown, but folks who are in the sustainability role, like we're kind of all on this team together. We're all working to deliver healthier and more sustainable projects to our clients. And so how do we do that? There's a lot of threads that carry through across all firms. So that's a group that I would say, just in general, has been a huge, huge inspiration and motivation for me.
That's awesome. I love hearing about like the collaboration between architects and just, our main goal is just to better the industry, to leave it better than what we found it as. And that's awesome that there's so much resources out like to do that. So my question is, another big part of our award was people bettering the industry and that terms of building standards and sustainability. So I know what you've been working on in that realm, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing to drive sustainability in the industry?
Yeah, so this here I'll speak a bit more to my role with Mindful Materials. My title there is Director of Engagement, and so I'm working particularly with folks who are on the architecture and design side. We also have a huge engagement with manufacturers and owners, but we're working to drive adoption of what's called the Common Materials Framework. So the Common Materials Framework is essentially you can think of it as a common language for how we evaluate the impact of materials, building materials specifically, because that's the industry we're in, but this could totally apply to, textile, like any consumer goods, any materials. That's like long-term future vision maybe. But I think that and particularly when we're talking about interior materials and finishes, there are so many impacts that are kind of out of sight, out of mind. And today we're hearing a lot more conversations about carbon and embodied carbon and the need to reduce embodied carbon in projects. But I think that we have to keep in mind that we can't only look at carbon at the expense of some of the other impacts, right? So the example that I give often is, say you have a product that's like carbon negative, but there's a very high risk that you have forced labor in the supply chain, or there are chemicals of concern that can cause health problems for occupants or for folks who are manufacturing that product, right? Is it a great trade-off? Like maybe not. And so we want to make sure that information is available for products and materials across all of their impact areas. And so the Common Materials Framework has really been a mechanism to allow us to evaluate the holistic impacts of materials. And so I would say, I should add this to your previous question about like accomplishments that I'm most proud of. I can't take credit for this one personally, but Mindful Materials as an organization, as a nonprofit, our work in the last couple years has really been to educate folks in the industry about this framework and to try to accelerate adoption of this framework in the way that we're not only evaluating material selections, but also documenting and tracking and developing metrics around product and project level impacts. And so one of the announcements that we were so happy to share recently is that we had endorsement from the AIA, USGBC, ILFI, and IWBI of using the Common Materials Framework as kind of a common denominator for how their materials credits within their different green building rating systems are going to be used. So that's something that is a huge, huge impact if we can kind of all start to be speaking the same language around how we evaluate materials in the industry. That can make huge ripple effects, big changes. So I think that that's something that is definitely going to have industry-wide impacts, and something that I'll be personally talking a lot more about in the coming years. So if you want to learn more, I will have a lot more to say about
Yeah.
that very soon.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll be chatting more next year about this too, if anyone wants to listen in then too. So, what advice do you have for architects just entering the field?
I would say don't be afraid to like stray from traditional architectural practice. I say this is like advice I would give to my younger self, because I've certainly felt a lot of anxiety, like the time that you spend in architecture school and the time that you spend to get your license, if you do pursue licensure, is significant. And so feeling like that time might have been wasted, I would say is a fear and an anxiety that I have felt. But architectural study and the skills that you learn as an architect have such broader applications than I think that we often realize. Just design thinking and problem solving and a lot of the things that, just become second nature to us as architects go so far in other areas of practice as well. And so I think that, don't pigeonhole yourself to just the standard and traditional architectural practice. Like, don't be afraid to kind of consider alternate career paths and think about, creative ways that your particular passion and your skill as a trained architect can intersect to allow you to have a greater impact.
Well, speaking of your very broad, untraditional career, where do you think you'll be professionally in like 10 years?
I appreciate that you shared these questions with me beforehand, and I looked at this one and I honestly don't know how to answer it. So I was thinking about, where was I 10 years ago, and would I have seen myself here? Probably not.
Hmm.
I would say that, I'm someone who, I think of myself as a lifelong learner. I'm always, and I talked earlier about kind of like pushing back on the status quo, asking questions, not accepting business as usual. Um, and to the point about like, don't be afraid to, take a non-traditional path. I think I'll still be in the architecture world, but I would like to see myself continuing to kind of push the boundaries of like, what does the role of an architect look like? And also just bringing more awareness to the impact that we have as architects, because I think, this statistic is shared often, but like, we spend 90% of our time indoors. And so I think a lot of times, when I talk to friends who aren't in architecture and I talk to them about how, technically as an architect, it's our responsibility to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. And people are like, oh, really? You kind of forget
Right.
that we're making buildings stand up. We're making sure that
Hmm.
they not only don't collapse on people, but we should also be really thinking about like, oh, make sure that our buildings are spaces that are healthy and that are keeping people healthy and aren't giving them chronic illnesses and sicknesses, which,
Hmm.
really ties back to like understanding the impacts of the materials that we specify. So I think, yes, I think in 10 years, I will still very much be on my soapbox, educating people about the impacts that we have, and how are we more mindful with those impacts and those decisions that we make, so that we can continue to have a positive impact to the greatest extent that we can.
Well, thank you and congratulations again, Laurel.
Thank you so much.
If anyone listening has any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Laurel, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Until next time, visit us on buildingenclosureonline.com for all your technical and educational resources.